You're listening to the London History Podcast, where we share our love of London through stories of the people, places, and events that have shaped this remarkable city. I'm your host, Hazel Baker, qualified London tour guide and founder of londonguidedwalks.co.uk. Today we're heading into the Square Mile to look at the City of London through two of my favourite lenses: money and women. We'll be talking about financial history, one pioneering professional woman, and how the city has changed from a world that actively shut women out to one where their contribution is finally starting to be recognised. Joining me is my colleague Jenny Funnell, a second-generation City of London tour guide who leads public and private walking tours with London Guided Walks, including financial history of London and pioneering women in the city. Jenny brings a fantastic mix of deep historical knowledge and on-the-ground guiding experience, and she's brilliant at spotting the stories that are hiding in plain sight on the city streets. You might also recognise Jenny's name or her voice. She's a voice actress and accomplished television actor and has starred alongside Dame Judi Dench in the much-loved family favourite As Time Goes By. This means we're in for a real treat today. A guide who not only knows her city history, but can really bring it to life. In this episode, we'll be exploring the world of one of the city's pioneering women, Mary Harris Smith, the world's first female chartered accountant, and asking what her story can tell us about London, work, and opportunity then and now. So, let's step into the city and meet today's guest, Jenny Funnell. Hello, Jenny.
Hello, Hazel. Lovely to be here.
I've been looking forward to this one because having been on your Pioneering Women Walk a few times, actually, and I know you talk about Mary Harris Smith, but one of the limitations that we have with doing physical walking tours is that there's so much more that you can say in a couple of minutes on a tour. So this is the perfect opportunity, isn't it, to really get to know her and the world that she was really trying to grapple through.
Yes, I agree. And out of all the women that we cover on that Pioneering Women's Walk, the least was known about Mary Harris Smith, which is why I find her so absolutely fascinating. Because, people have no idea. People walk past her plaque because it's low down. It's set behind a whole load of Lime bikes. It's usually got some office worker leaning against it smoking, which enrages me. And, you don't know much about her. So that's one of the joys of the podcast today, to introduce people to her.
That's right. I mean, it's her plaque is right next to the most expensive building to be built in the City of London, Bloomberg. So all of those thousands of people whizzing from Cannon Street Station up into the city, back every day. And there she is for everyone to see. And yet she's still a little bit of a mystery. So what do we know about the plaque itself? When was that put up?
Well, the plaque was put up very late in the City of London. It was put up in May 2020, and actually it had to be delayed because of the pandemic. And it was only put up by the second manager of the Institute of Chartered Accounting, a woman called Fiona Wilkinson. And she decided that they should be celebrating Mary Harris Smith's centenary of entering the membership of the Institute. And she was also had a wonderful centenary project manager, a woman called Julie Root Gutteridge. And between them, they really fought to get this plaque up. And so you're right, it's sort of opposite the Bloomberg building. It's in the same vicinity as Mansion House, the Bank of England. I mean, it's really up there in the City of London, but it's low down. And when I was looking for other women, Hazel, in the City of London, this is going to, well, you probably know this, I found it really shocking. There are 3, including Mary's, 2 women in the City of London. I mean, it's appalling.
It's really shocking, that this is such a new plaque. But secondly, only 3 in the whole of the Square Mile. I mean, yeah. I did a podcast episode earlier on about how many statues there were of women that were non-royal. And that was across all of London, let alone in the city. That is quite, I mean, I knew it was going to be bad, but 3 is abysmal.
It is. I mean, the other one is not very far away from Mary Harris Smith's. It's between Cheapside. It's actually on Mansion House Street, which is the shortest street in the city. And that's to Elizabeth Fry, who had lived there. She was the wonderful prison reformer, a Quaker. So she has a plaque. And then there's another one, and actually it does still count to the city, but it's right on the boundaries, and it's to Susanna Annesley, who was the mother of Charles and John Wesley, the Methodist priests. But it's extraordinary. Those are the only ones.
I mean, I don't know how to say this really, but I mean, the number of women that have made key contributions, and you mentioned that you have these two women fighting to get this plaque up in 2020.
Yes.
There shouldn't be fight whatsoever. So there shouldn't have been any pushback on that. But it does sound like even nowadays we're still having to fight for visibility.
Yes, we are. And actually, it was those two women also who wanted to celebrate the centenary, who brought out, you can get it on the Institute of Chartered Accounting for England and Wales. It's on their website. It's a wonderful 100 years celebrating women. It's a pamphlet about women in accountancy. But that was only from those two women in 2020. You know, it should have been done way before. As we know, it's visibility. Women are very invisible still.
Yeah. I like the idea of a plaque that isn't too high, that you can read it, but the placement of it does mean with those bikes, it just means that you can't get to it.
No, no, absolutely. And sometimes you have to sort of stand back. But I think, you know, I always say to my guests when we take them on a walk, it should have a spotlight on top of it just so people can see, because she was such a fantastic woman. And, you know, I think she fought. And the one thing I love is she never gave up. You know, she didn't enter the Chartered Institute until she was 75. She'd been fighting since she was in her 40s, and she only got in because of the Sex Disqualification Act of 1919. It wasn't because they had changed their ways. But we'll sort of learn more about that as we go along.
So let's go back to her London origins, because she is a true Londoner. So Kingsland, isn't it? So by
Yes.
Dalston, which is not an area I don't think we've covered actually on the podcast. So tell us a little bit about her beginnings.
Her beginnings. Well, she was in a very happy household. I mean, her mother looked after her. Her father, it's in some research they said he was a banker. Some said he was a clerk to a banker, but he was a worker. And they lived in small Victorian terraced house. They're not there now, sadly, because obviously we had the advent of the railway, Dalston Junction and Kingsland, that came in 1865, and all those little Victorian terraced houses were bulldozed for the railway. And actually, the coming of the railway changed the entire map of that area, because it was Kingsland, especially, was a tiny rural hamlet. It was full of sort of market gardens. There were clay and brick works, but it was very, very small. And suddenly you get the railway coming in, and it's still got its street patterns, but it's lost its own individual identity and has sort of been morphed into Dalston. But that's where Mary lived, and her house was right on that corner where Dalston station is now. And
Fantastic.
yeah, absolutely. And it was full of people who commuted to the city, who worked, you know, in banks, professionals. So she would have been growing up in that environment.
And do you think maybe bringing work home was how she was exposed to the accounting world?
I'm pretty sure, because her father really admired. I mean, from an early age, she showed such an aptitude for mathematics. I mean, she was obviously a bit of a genius. I mean, I admire anyone who's good at maths. He sort of really supported her. Yes, he would have brought work home. And in fact, he got her first job through friends in a mercantile insurance company. So yes, she would have seen him bring work home. And possibly, you know, she may well, as she was growing up, have had access to bookkeeping, you know, for local tradesmen. We don't know, because there was a lot of little local businesses that are not there now, you know, since the railway people have, it's more residential. But yes, she would have been exposed to that at a very early age.
It might be worth sharing with the listeners what kind of era we're talking about.
Oh yes, of course. Mary was born in 1844, so she was born in Kingsland then, and the railway came in 1865, and she lived to the ripe old age of 89. So yes, that's the era we're talking about, a time of great change actually in the city, with, you know, the Industrial Revolution and the railways, but also with laws being changed and women suddenly having many more opportunities open to them.
I think geography matters on when you mentioned about the railway, because then with Kingsland, that's a really good route into the city. You're saying if
Yes.
lots of people or men will be working in the city anyway, so she would have then certainly just been able to kick into the London's commercial core, because then her office is Great Queen Victoria Street.
Yes, that's right. And I love the fact that she's chosen there. I mean, it's such a powerhouse of a junction. It's sitting right sort of nearby Bank Junction with the Bank of England. You've got the Royal Exchange, Mansion House. And, it's we all know that the Square Mile is still, that's what the City of London is called, the Square Mile by some people. It was such a male-dominated area. And I actually think that the choice of her office there reflects her professional ambition, because the Bank of England was there, and the Bank of England, it was another 7 years. She set up her office in 1887. It took another 7 years for the Bank of England to start employing women. She was also right by Mansion House, which is where the Lord Mayor of the City of London takes up residence for 1 year. And at that time, we had, I think it was the 609th Lord Mayor. So Mary would have known who the Lord Mayor was. It's someone called Reginald Hanson. And it wasn't for another 98 years that we got the very first female Lord Mayor of the City of London in 1983. So she would have been aware, that how male dominated it was in that area, but she didn't care. She just, as she kind of so famously said to the Institute, require of me what you would require of a man, and I will deliver. And I think by her setting up her office there, she's going, I'm here, I'm on an equal footing.
What kind of services did she offer?
She did everything. I mean, she absolutely loved liquidation and, as she called, unraveling the mess that many people's accounts were in and restoring order out of chaos. So she did a lot of receivership, liquidation, but she also, she was an accountant to many male firms. I mean, to estate agents, to hotels, to publishing firms. She also took on a lot of the female suffragette groups. She worked for them, but she was also, she did the accounts for the Royal College of Needlework, and she worked for many different, I mean, varied, and people loved her, and she got an awful lot of work, but she was on her own.
I bet she was wonderful at puzzles. She's like the
She was.
unraveling,
Yeah.
and in all that sort of investigative puzzle. Again, in finances, must have been a brilliant brain that she had. And I do like the way that she didn't shy away. She wasn't on the edges of the financial centre. She was right there to remind everybody that she was good as everybody else. I mean, if you're talking about the businesses that she's offering, you can imagine that it's people going, oh, if you want someone to trust who's good, who's blowing good, then why don't you just speak with Mary?
Yes.
And
Yes.
and you said having, and you've just said, and it's still quite shocking, really, that she had male customers.
I know. Yes, I know. Absolutely. So you think, well, hang on a minute. And when she was fighting, and she never gave up to join the Institute and also the Society of Accounts and Auditors, she had many male friends, many who were MPs, who were saying, we're behind you. And so she had support. It was just the old boys club of the Institute, which we hear about throughout the financial world, really, with women trying to gain entrance. It's quite shocking.
It is very. Now, she advertised herself as the lady accountant in women's periodicals, but used M. Harris Smith professionally. I think that's the whole like J.K. Rowling kind of thing. How do you think that the Victorian and Edwardian Londoners would have interpreted those different identities? Do you think that would have been just a norm for women needing to get out there and not wanting to ruffle a few feathers? What do you think their take would be?
Well, I think she was quite unusual, Mary, because when the census, which was in 1886, I believe, there were, I think, about 6 other female accountants on there, but none who set up their own business. So she was really, trailblazing. And so I think, nobody had anything to go by. So I think she was very wise. She thought, well, I'll call myself M. Harris Smith. And as you quite rightly said, with J.K. Rowling, George Eliot, so many female writers took, they masked their gender because they wanted to not be biased at the initial, prospect of getting work. Even in a much more modern time, going up to the 1960s, Dame Steve Shirley, who was a wonderful entrepreneur for the Institute of Technology, and she suddenly said to her husband, I'm trying to get work and no one's replying to my letters. And he jokingly said, why don't you sign them as Steve? Sign it as Steve. And she got replies. And, you know, sadly, we lost her late last year, but she always referred to herself as Dame Steve Shirley. So we see that a lot. And I think Mary knew this. And so she changed the job title depending on who her audience was. So, you know, she was lady accountant in the periodicals that a nice lady might be reading. So things like there was the Queen, there was the Ladies' Newspaper, the Court Chronicle, there was the Gentlewoman, the Woman's Signal, and the Signal, actually, she gave an interview in about her accountancy. And so there it would be accepted. She wouldn't be taken perhaps too seriously to put women off, possibly. But obviously, once they got through that front door or her office door, they would have then realised they were in very safe hands. And for the male newspapers, she was M. Harris Smith, public accountant, and that would have been in the Daily Telegraph, the Courier, the Daily News, London Evening Standard, and that's where she would have advertised as that because she had to, and she played the game.
I can just imagine some of the men's faces walking into the office and wanting to speak to Mr. M. Smith, and she's going, "Yep, you're looking at him."
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. You know, and you just think, well, there you are. I mean, it was such a clever move, but it's not new. I mean, so many women chose to mask their gender.
Yeah, I remember doing an episode about dentistry, Georgian dentistry, with the lovely Sarah Murden, and she was sharing her research on how women were dentists, and they once again used that woman dentist because then women felt a lot more comfortable being serviced by women, but also for children as well. So that really played into a part of, like, you're in a safe space, and that, but then also had the male version of the adverts elsewhere as well. But you've got to play the game, haven't you?
Yes, very definitely. There was a fantastic woman who actually became the second woman to belong to the Institute of Accounting, Ethel Watts, and she was the first to get through there by passing an exam. So, but she said, and I'll just quote, she got invited to go to the Junior Carlton Club because she was a member of the Institute. And when she arrived, they barred her because women weren't allowed in the Carlton Club. And she said the irony was, had I been a waitress, I would have been allowed in. And then she talked about another dinner when she'd been invited, and they just invited her as E. Watts, Esquire, and they didn't let her in because she wasn't wearing trousers and a dinner jacket. So, you know, all of those things, you just think still we have to fight. I mean, I know that was in Mary's time or a little bit later, but you just think the things that women had to do.
Can you imagine her actually going in with trousers and a dinner jacket, though?
Can
That
you
would have
imagine?
been even more outlandish. How dare she?
Yes, absolutely. They would have kicked her out. They would have been, you know, I just think it's so ridiculous that you get that far on merit. And also what we forget is that most of these women were going home and still having to cook the dinner and possibly look after the children and still achieving what men achieved. So in a way, well, to me, I think their achievements are far greater because they had so much more to contend with.
That's right. Overachievers.
Yeah.
Saying that, I was thinking about the banquets that I've been to at, you know, Guildhall and Banqueting House, and the dress code for the women is floor length dresses.
Do they still say that?
Yeah. So, you know, evening attire.
I want you to wear a trouser suit the next time you go, Hazel.
I'm just thinking that now, you know. So you mentioned about her having some female clients, including suffragettes. Let's draw attention to the SPEW. So anybody not knowing what that means, I'll take a deep breath. The Society for Promoting the Employment of Women. So this really started her off, wasn't it? Of actually, you know, focusing on women, helping women, and really honing her skills.
Yes, absolutely. So we talked about Mary being so gifted mathematically. She actually went and studied maths and accountancy under a very lovely man called James Haddon at the King's College School in London. And actually, she got a master's degree at the age of 16, which shows you how clever she was. But then she came across SPEW. And this was, as you just said, the Society to promote employment in women. It was founded by a woman called Jessie Boucherette. She founded it in 1859. And she founded it, and this is her quote, to help superfluous middle-class women to find work beyond the governess class. And so she set it up. And, you know, it was funded, and they set up classes for women in bookkeeping. That's how they started, and shorthand. And Mary Harris Smith went on a bookkeeping class. She went that was run by SPEW. And had SPEW not come around, who knows what would have happened. But it was absolutely fantastic. And I know I'm slightly just drawing to a tangent, but this annoyed me so much when I found this. So it was founded by Jessie Boucherette, who also became part of the Langham Place group, which was a place of many suffragettes, as you know, and many other like-minded women who met to further women's employment and status. And there's a wonderful woman called Sophia Jex Blake, who was the one of the first female doctors. Elizabeth Garrett Anderson actually was the first, but she was the first in Scotland. But she actually went to Queen's College to study mathematics, first of all. And because she was such a brilliant pupil, she was offered a tutorship while she was there as a student. And there's a letter from her father. So it was men were very against women earning money. And her father says, "I've only this moment heard that you contemplate being paid for your tutorship. This would be quite beneath you, darling, and I simply cannot consent to it. Take the post as one of honour and usefulness, and I shall be glad. You will be no loser. But to be paid for the work would be to alter things completely and would lower you sadly in the eyes of almost everybody." That's her father.
Says everybody, he really means himself.
Yes, absolutely. But that was one of the things that SPEW did, because they found that actually so many women that they helped pleaded anonymity when it came to getting a paycheck because they were so ashamed. I mean, they were just so ashamed of having to take money, and they didn't feel less. In fact, they felt of a lower caste. They felt of a lower class. And actually, the thing that they were fighting against, SPEW, was the awful remark. It's in their booklet, I believe. She was such a clever girl, such a pity she couldn't afford training. And they decided they'd make sure that never happened. And they funded so many wonderful classes. They're still going now in a charity, the women's charity, and they do fantastic work. They've slightly changed their name, the Promotion for Training of Women, but they give bursaries and they give interest-free loans. And it all started way back in 1859 by Jessica Boucherette, and benefited Mary.
Amazing, isn't it? Even when you're thinking about good bookkeeping, even if you're supposed to be at home like the good little wife, you're supposed to know bookkeeping, because how else are you going to be running a house effectively?
Yeah, exactly. But that doesn't count.
Of course not. You don't get paid for that.
You don't get paid for that, no. And I find that shocking that people looked down. I hadn't realised this, that people looked down on women if they were paid for work. It was just appalling, I think, and it was seen as shameful. I mean, but it's shocking. Why shouldn't women work?
Oh yeah, I think the idea is that women work for free. You do
Well,
your things for charity, you organise the galas and all of that hard work, and we all know exactly how exhausting something like that is, but you do it for free, darling. And that's acceptable. But I suppose if you think about the women that did need to work, so you've got the scrubbers later on a little bit in the Victorian period cleaning the actual rails of the underground. You've got women cleaning bottles. You've got women carrying the sheep carcasses in Leadenhall Market. It's all jobs that are not very nice. And if I suppose it's women, if you need to work, then you're going to have to pay in order to work. The price to pay is to do the stuff no one else wants.
Yes, absolutely that. And that's what SPEW was setting up against, because they also saw, which I think is very clever, they didn't just see it as a problem that the sort of work that women wanted to do wasn't open to them. They saw that it was also, they weren't qualified to do it because they had very inferior schooling. A lot of them had to leave school and go and look after the family or look after the mother. And, they didn't have the same schooling as men. And that's where SPEW thought, rather than just giving people money, we need to actually change the way women are educated, because that is a much better gift that you can give than a chunk of money. And that's what they did with these courses. They held their courses. They were mainly in Charlotte Street, and then they moved to Great Ormond Street, actually. But they did shorthand, they did bookkeeping. Later on, when the typewriter was invented, they did typing, and they also, part of the job was to change women's mindset, because a lot of women, let's say in retail, there were lots of retail outlets near where Mary's office was. A lot of women had been trained to believe that women would like to be served by a man. That was what men told women they wanted. They used the argument that women weren't strong enough to carry bales of cloth and pieces of linen, up and down stairs. Of course they were. So it was just to change that mindset that A, it was not shameful to be paid. It was wonderful to be educated, and working in retail is a very valid job, amongst others. So it was it was so valuable on so many fronts for women.
I think there's that worry about lack of control
Yes,
of where the women are. They're not under your roof. Maybe a shame for the men that the women are having to go out to work to earn. And that's the same red pill that many people are swallowing even nowadays. But as a society as a whole, I think you should, if you find what you're good at and then you do that, and that means you're contributing to society. If everybody did their best at what they were best at, I think the world would be in a much better place rather than
yes,
regarding on how many X chromosomes someone has. Now,
yes.
I remember my mom telling me when she was leaving school, she had the option of getting married, becoming a teacher, or a secretary. That was it.
That was it. That was her career's advice, was it?
Yeah. So even from when we're talking, what should be like in the 1850s and 60s, we're talking about Mary. That's 100 years before my mom had more options, but it was still limited. So we've come on leaps and bounds because I was brought up with the idea of I could be anything I want to be as long as I do it well. That's what. So
Yes.
we've progressed a long way, but it's taken a heck of a time, hasn't it?
Taken a huge amount of time. It really has. And, what's so lovely, I talk about the walkabout the women on the London Stock Exchange, for example, and they've now got Julia Hoggart as a CEO. And she talked about I heard her in an interview and somebody said, well, at last you've broken the glass ceiling. And she went, no, 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 we haven't. There has been progress. We still have a long way to go. We've merely cracked it. So you're right when you think that, women only started working on the stock exchange floor in 1973 and now they got their own CEO. And Lloyd's of London had their own CEO several years ago. It did accelerate, but we are still kind of knocking away. I mean, we've only had the Lady Mayor at the moment, and she does want to be called that. She is only the third out of 698 or seven.
I see a pattern of threes here, Jenny. We've got 3 plaques in the city of London to women. We've had 3 Lord Lady Mayors. Well, I mean, I suppose you can't go down from 3, can you? The only way is up.
Only way is up, as the song says. The only way is up, and it's heartening, but it's a long way to go, really. I don't know if this is. I was looking for this quote because we were talking about Mary's office being round the corner from the Bank of England, and they didn't employ women for a further 7 years, despite the fact that the Bank of England, as you and I both know, has had a female persona really ever since it was founded. The old lady of Threadneedle Street after the James Gilray cartoon, Minerva on the top of the bank, Lady Britannia. But I found this, which I read to some of my people on the walk, if it sort of turns into a longer stop. This is an internal memo from 1920, Hazel, and it's written by men in the Bank of England. It says, we're of the opinion that men will get through considerably more work than an equal number of women, and that the standards of their work will be higher. The value of the work of women clerks is lessened because of their frequent absences, because they are emotional and easily upset. There is also a tendency amongst the younger ones not to look upon their work as a career in life. They had to resign the minute they got married. That didn't change until 1949. I mean, you just think this is just extraordinary.
Yeah, they couldn't win either way.
No, exactly. So even, when they did get there, they couldn't win either way. So it's just, oh.
So if we're talking about the competitors and the colleagues in this bigger world, this is the financial heart here in the City of London. Who were the male accountants and audit firms that operating in around Queen Victoria Street that would have been Mary's direct competition?
Well, she was surrounded by them, being where she is. The main one, actually, was Saffery and Son, which really interested me because when I sort of did my research on them, Saffery and Son, which was an accountancy firm, they were founded by John Joseph Saffery. He was the first founding member of the council of the ICAEW, the Institute of Chartered Accounting, in 1880. So he was very big in the institute, and he would have been very aware, I'm sure, of Mary, because the number of times she wrote and applied, blocking her from being there. So that's really interesting. So I just think it's very interesting. She's 3 minutes walk away from where their offices were. There was also the Cooper brothers. There was Bishop and Clark. They were all male firms, but there were also there was printing firms. There was the Argus. There was the Times. There were lots of retail shops. So there were, and obviously all the bank clerks, in the area. But it's just very interesting that out of those accountants, that one person was very big with the ICAEW, which is interesting.
I wonder if there was any beef on the street level that was happening.
Oh, I hope so.
And when I look at old videos of the City of London, I very rarely see women on the streets. It's the men in their pinstripe suits, canes, and top hats or bowler hats if it's the 1920s. You don't very often see women, so I wonder if she stuck out like a sore thumb or she decided to wear darker clothes and just kind of blend in. I want to know whether it's, sometimes when I put my clothes on and it's like an armour. Yeah, I wonder how she played it. It would be really nice to have a good old chat with her, really, and work out where she was at with that.
I'm sure she probably wouldn't have worn flamboyant clothes. When you look at there are very few portraits of her, but one has been commissioned actually by the ICAEW, thank goodness, of her. But she's always wearing quite dark clothing or dark blues. So she probably would have done that to fit in.
Be
And
taken
also
seriously, I suppose.
be taken seriously. Exactly that. Exactly that. And there was a dress code. I mean, even when women were finally allowed to work at the Bank of England, heaven forfend if they turned up with a sprig on their white blouse. They had to go downstairs and they had to wear a blue Holland overall instead to cover up their clothing, which reminds me of the days of school uniform if you were wearing the wrong uniform. But that's, what it was like. So she probably just wanted to be taken seriously and to fit in.
Not worth the risk.
Not worth the risk.
By the 1920s, she's employing other people, isn't she?
Yes, yes, she is, because it's taken off. And also by 1920, she had now finally, at the age of 75, been admitted into the Institute of Chartered Accounting for England and Wales. I'd love to say it was because they saw the error of their ways and said, Mary, you're so brilliant, join us. Unfortunately, Hazel, as you know, it was only because of the bringing in of the 1919 Sexual Disqualification Act.
Then tell us more about it. Go on.
Well, I mean, I love I'm a Virginia Woolf fan, and she called it the peaceful revolution. But it was the first act that saw women as people under the law, especially married women, because if you were married, as you'll know, you suddenly had no identity. You were the same person as your husband, and all your property, all your earnings, all your inheritance went to your husband. So that changed that. And that was it was a landmark law. It also, I'd like to say, it opened the door to many, many professions. I mean, technically, it meant that you could now become a barrister, a solicitor. You could actually be a magistrate and be appointed on the jury. I hadn't realised to be a juror, you weren't allowed until after that act. But even then, it was still down to the judge, and often the judge would not choose women to sit as jurors. But you could become a member of the Royal Veterinary College. You could become a doctor. There were many, many more things that you could do. But it was still relatively common for women just to be on a much lower role as bookkeepers rather than accountants. And actually, I found a couple of old advertisements for accountancy, and it said in brackets, "No bookkeepers to apply," because they thought they did, which I thought, oh, so it was just, I know. So, it was. It was quite extraordinary, but that act meant that they had to give in and take Mary on board. And I really wish that their president, I think he was gone by then, he was a man called Charles Fitch Kemp, who his name is etched on my brain because he said when she applied, he said he would find it embarrassing to address a staff that was composed partly of women, and he'd rather retire from his job than do so. And then he said, "The time has not arrived, nor is it in the early future, when the admission of women as members of our institute can, with advantage, be conceded." And that was in the late, 1800s, early 1900s. And suddenly she's there as a member, but not because they changed their ways. Sadly, it's such a shame. But she got in, and they would have been hostile. I mean, suddenly there's a woman invading their boys' club, For goodness sake. I mean, they would have thought it wasn't, they probably thought she wasn't up to the job. She was probably more competent and much more able than many of them who got there just by being male.
All those little stories we're never going to find out, are we?
No, it's such a shame if a portrait could talk, Hazel, or a plaque could talk.
Indeed, or a secret diary is found.
Yeah. Because I found out whether she had any living relatives. I couldn't find out whether she had any living relatives. I know she died 2 years after her retirement, actually, at the grand old age of 89. She moved down to St Leonards-on-Sea on the Sussex coast, and she died in a nursing home there, which kind of implies maybe she didn't have any relatives who could have looked after her. But I don't know for a fact, and I would love to find out more about her personal life.
Yeah.
You
Well, I
know,
hope she had a sea view.
I think she did. I think she did. She deserved it, certainly. One tiny thing that I would just like to say is that when she retired in the late 1920s, she was aged 87. And what I love about the story about her is she had a motto that she'd had painted on a board that she took wherever she went. And I like to think that she moved that to St Leonards-on-Sea, and it said, "None cease to rise, but those who cease to climb." And I think she's really shown that she lived by that motto. She never, ever gave up. I mean, had to be knocked down and told no. And, when she applied to the Society of Accounts and Auditors, it's actually there documented in the minutes of the meeting. When they read her letter out, it said her letter was met with derisory laughter and it was put in the bin.
Yeah.
And she didn't, and you just think, and she kept going. She wrote them another 3 letters. She tried the Institute of Chartered Accounting. She even applied to sit their exams. She was overqualified, but she thought that might be a way in. And she did not stop. And I just love that tenacity in her.
Just to keep going. I mean, that's just, yeah, that's really admirable.
Yeah.
So she finally gets into the club.
Yes.
By hook or by crook. And then she employs women to work with her.
Doesn't she? Yeah, which I'm really thrilled about. And if those women were given a chance, I don't know if any of them had taken advantage of SPEW, of the bookkeeping classes. I would hazard that many of them did. But I know that she also trained up a lot of women who came to her as article clerks, and she gave their own training. And she was not biased at all. I mean, but obviously, when I say she's not biased at all, I would take in only women if you were allowed. But she did. She trained up those women as well and imparted her wonderful, not just her accountancy mind and her experience, but hopefully her experience of life, and not to give up with those knocks.
She did some training through SPEW as well, didn't she, at Langham Place?
Yes, she did. Yeah. She did, yes, because they shared the same, they moved into those premises, SPEW. And that's when it changed its name to the Society of the Promotion of Training for Women.
Sounds
she did
a bit nicer.
Yes, it does sound a bit nicer, doesn't it? And also, I have to say, years back, when I first Googled SPEW, it came up for the Society of Protection for Elvish Welfare. It was from J.K. Rowling, and that's the first thing that came up, not SPEW, the women's organisation.
Well, Hermione would be very pleased that you found out about her campaign.
Would have been very pleased. I would have thought, for goodness sake. But yes, she moved. She held bookkeeping classes, accountancy classes, mathematics at Langham Place, and she helped so many more women. I mean, she could have just said, right, I've got there now, I'm done, but she didn't. She opened that door. And as she said, to when her friend Millicent Fawcett, one of the suffragettes, on I think about the 3rd or 4th rejection from the Institute, Millicent said to her, well, why don't you just set up your own institute? And she said, that is not the point. I will not rest until women are working the accountancy world on an equal footing to men. And that I love her for, because she could easily have just set up her own and gone her own way, but she has changed the way for women in finance and business. She really has.
You mentioned about Millicent Garrett Fawcett and suffragettes. So can you tell us a little bit more about her involvement there?
Mary Harris Smith took work for the suffragette campaigns. I think there were about 3. They all had slightly different names, but she agreed to do their bookkeeping. And at the beginning, she agreed to do their bookkeeping for free. I mean, she just helped them with their campaigns. And so she met Millicent Fawcett, who became a very dear friend. And I love the fact that when she was finally admitted into the Institute, Gordon Selfridge of Selfridges had held a big Thanksgiving dinner, and he had 2 guests of honour, 2 women, and he chose Mary Harris Smith and Millicent Fawcett to sit at the table. And I just think that's why I love Selfridges. I just think
he's gone up in my estimation.
Yes, yeah. But so she was very, she did believe in suffrage. She did believe in the vote for women, and indeed would have seen, the changes happening. And whether she took part in any of the marches, she was probably too busy, but she had a lot of friends in the Women's Suffrage Society and supported their work. And one of these, as I said, was Millicent, who gave her friend very good advice and stood by her side, I think, and helped pick her up when she had all these knocks.
I know you kind of drip fed us a little bit about Mary's legacy, but let's summarize what it is. How are we acknowledging her now, and how are we benefiting from all of her tenacity and hard work and just refusing to accept no?
Well, we've had lots of firsts. We've had many, we've got Julia Hoggart, who's now the CEO of the Stock Exchange. We had Inga Beale, who was part of Lloyd's of London. She was the first CEO of a very big gentlemen's club. But also SPEW and the London, the Institute actually have various schemes now. They've set up schemes for funding women and for giving bursaries for training. And that's all because of Mary Harris Smith. She set up quite a few, or she didn't, but it's set up in her name. So she's got a lasting legacy. And also, it's a great read for anyone who's listening to the podcast. You just go onto the Institute and it's a booklet called 100 Years of Celebrating Women in Chartered Accountancy. And it documents not just Mary's fight, but Ethel Watts and various other members. And also, interestingly enough, because of Mary, they've now had 2 women presidents of the Institute, which would have been unheard of in Charles Fitch-Kemp's time. He's probably turning over in his grave. But as I said, they've got many bursaries and schemes through England and Wales. There's a 6-month programme they run to empower women and to give them the confidence that women, I think, still need a little bit, to break into that business world. And they also give them free technical support and help. And as I said, there are bursaries. They have an accounting competition for students between the ages of 16 and 18. And interestingly enough, in 2020, it was the first time it was actually a 50-50 split of male and female competitors, and also people from very ethnically diverse backgrounds. So it's opened it up for that. And that's Mary's legacy as well, because had she not fought and done that, she wouldn't have given courage to everybody. And she got letters from pioneers and from women who were thanking her once she became a member. I mean, she had a big fan base.
That sounds wonderful, doesn't it? I think she and I would get on very, very well.
Oh, you would. Yes, you could go and take tea with her, or perhaps a gin and tonic.
Yes, I think the latter.
Yes.
So in terms of the walks that you do, I mean, you mentioned that you do the Pioneering Women Walk, which is where Mary is covered. But a lot of the stuff we're talking about is financial history, which is, of course, you do the history of the financial city of London. So what can you tell people that are listening that doesn't make it sound as boring as I've just described it?
It's not boring at all. It's absolutely fascinating. And you'll learn on the walk, not just about current finance and how it's changing, but also about the very beginning, when London was Londinium, founded by the Romans. And I talk to people when we stop outside the Bloomberg building, and I talk about when they were digging up the River Walbrook and they found over 400 Roman writing tablets, 75 of which have been translated, and they're all financial transactions going back, to AD 57. And I find that fascinating that, from all the back then, it's been a trading hub. And then we talk through, we go through, who would have thought, Hazel, that the humble coffee bean really drove the financial revolution? Because it was really the opening of coffee houses that became sort of prototype offices, businesses, places for merchants to meet from all over the world. And that is what drove the financial financial revolution. And on the backs of those coffee houses, we start to see London's economy becoming very, very dynamic and the most prosperous in the world. And we talk about the history of that. We talk about the very first coffee, what it tasted like. I mean, it was disgusting. It was described as essence of soot and syrup of old shoes. Not nice. But all of those stories and the people involved. We talk about the women. People think it was just men who invested, but it wasn't. Although women had no governance in financial institutions, they played a lot of, they bought bonds, they had goes on the stock exchange. So it's covering all of those stories, including going way back to the Rothschilds, that wonderful, very wealthy family. But they started out in a Jewish ghetto in Frankfurt. So it's all talking about those origins. And the wonderful joy about the financial walk, as with all the walks that London Guided Walks offer, they're not just dry dates and facts. It's about the people behind those businesses and the people behind those stories. And that's what really interests me and you, I know, and all of our guides. And that's what people will learn about. It's fascinating.
It's a very good walk, and you're adding things all the time. And what I do like is that, when we say women's history, that's also human history.
Yes, yes.
We just need to talk about it a little bit more, and it's perfect, I think, for corporate tours. It's work related, but it's got a different angle that hasn't really been addressed before.
I agree. And when we do take corporate groups, they love it. They love it. And I think the very first walk I did for you was taking a group of insurers, from insurance company. And I remember thinking, they'll know more. Well, what can I tell them? They didn't know half of the history of it, and they were fascinated because suddenly it's brought to life. It's brought to life, and suddenly you see their eyes light up. And one of them said, I expected that to be a dry, dull tour, and it was so fascinating. So that's testament, isn't it, to the interest of the financial walk.
And also to your skill.
Well, that's very great.
So if anybody wants to listen more about the financial history of the city or pioneering women in the city, then of course Jenny is available for guided walks. You can book your tickets there or book a private tour online, and she has her own private profile page on our website, so you can check out everything there, including some very interesting blog posts, including, I think my favourite one is about the curse tablets. Oh, fantastic. So, Jenny, much appreciated. Thank you so much. And thank you very much to Mary Harris Smith.
Yes, I echo that. And thank you, Hazel, for having me as a guest today. I've really enjoyed it.